Welcome back everybody to linuxacademy.com. My name is Terry, and in today's video we're going to continue our exploration of Nginx. So one of the things that we've done in our previous videos is we've taken a look at our basic vhost configurations. And by the vhost, I mean the virtual hosts that allow, much like Apache, our Nginx server to answer for one or more domains using a specific path and configuration for that domain to refer to content. So if we look at our host file, you'll see that we have set up a couple of domains that we can use in our example. And in our case, we're going to use www.myexample.local, which is set to my local host internal IP of 172.31.105.111, and that's what we're going to use in this example. So if we go over to our Etsy Nginx, and as we talked about before, we set up vhost.d for our virtual host configurations. If you're following along either on a Debian system or an Ubuntu system and you're more familiar with sites available or sites enabled, as we mentioned in that video, you can use that configuration with the soft links between the two of them, as long as you have the nginx.conf file importing the correct directory for your vhost configuration. Here we have three configurations. We have our default configuration, our node configuration, and my example, which is what we're going to be looking at today. So if we are going to have the potential to have multiple file locations, either remotely or locally, serving content, we have to use what's called the location directive. So let's go ahead and edit our my example and look at how we have it configured right now. So if we edit that, we see that we have everything configured on a root file system across the entire server for both HTTP and HTTPS for var www html my example. Now that's fine. That means that all content will start with the index file as we have configured in this line in var www html my example. That's a really basic vhost configuration. So one thing that Nginx allows us to do in our virtual server configuration is to have the ability to send traffic to different proxies or to serve different files based on the request URI. So these blocks are defined using the location directive that we place inside the server directive that we're in now. So for example, we can configure the virtual server to send a portion of our requests to a proxy server, other portions to a different proxy server, and then to serve the rest with files from our local file system. All we have to do this is we configure the virtual server to define one or more location blocks, one for each case. And then it tests the requested URIs against those parameters and replies back with the files contained in that directive and in that path. But we have to make one change first. So right now we have the root system configured at var www html universally for anything that's coming over HTTP. So we're actually going to erase that. So let's come over to here, and we're going to add a location system. So we use the location directive, and in this case we want to define a directive for the slash or the root path. In other words, what is my content location going to be served from within my www.myexample.local. In other words, I'm redefining where my root is for the file system. So what we're going to do is define the root of our file system location the same way we did in our server configuration for slash, which is going to give us root in var www html my example. And that's all we're going to do here. Let's go ahead and save this file. And we've effectively done exactly the same thing. Since we only have one location directive, it's going to allow us to serve the content for everything in www.myexample.local. After that first slash will come from the root location of var www html www.myexample.local. So before we restart Nginx, we could see that if we ran a links to http www.myexample.local, we got the myexample.local result. And if we do a LSAL on var www html my example. We'll see that's the only file in there. And that was the content that we served. That was when we were using the root inside the server directive declaration and without the location. All we did was move that into the location directive to give us some flexibility in the future if we want to serve content from multiple locations. So let's do a service nginx restart. And now if we repeat that command, we should then get the www.myexample.local as before, which we do. So we haven't made any change here, but what we've done is we've changed our vhost configuration to be more flexible so that we can have multiple location content served from different places. Why would that be something we might want to do? So for example, let's say that for whatever reason, we wanted to change our location so that if we went to www.myexample.local/Google, we wanted to serve actually the Google web page. We're not going to actually redirect to the web page. We're going to get the Google content and serve it as a proxy. So we're going to proxy that connection. So let's take a look at what that would look like. So if we did a VI on www.myexample.local, then now what we can do is underneath of here, we can say location/Google. Let's serve the content from the proxy pass, and we'll serve www.google.com. And again, we're not redirecting necessarily. All we're doing is saying any content that's being requested from the Google directory, we're just going to pass in the Google website. Now, we could take that content, if we knew, for example, it was a search parameter that we could pass to Google, we could certainly do that with some regular expressions. We're not going to do that here. We're just showing how we can have multiple contents externally as well as internally. So now if I save that file, and again, I always encourage you to do an nginx -t to make sure that you haven't had any typos. Then we're going to do a service nginx and restart. And then let's clear our screen. And if we do a links http www.myexample.local/Google, you'll see we're getting the information from Google, and Google's asking about a bunch of cookies that we're going to allow any cookies to come from Google. So at this point, I've got the Google website that I'm serving up content from a proxy pass for any call that I make to the /Google directory. So, I mean, that's not a really great example of what we might do with it, but we could redirect content or link to another web server just by using a URL location from within our directive. So let's go ahead and exit out of this. See what else we could do here. So one of the other things that is probably more common is we might have an images directory, for example, that we want to answer for multiple domains. So all we're going to do here is let's go over to var www html, and instead of using my example, let's create a directory called images. Now, if I've got a web server that contains multiple domains, I may want to consolidate all of my image calls to a single domain where I'm going to, or not to a single domain, a single directory where I'm going to maintain and save all of my images on my web server. So I don't necessarily want to have an images directory within each domain configuration path for my website. I may just want them all in a single place, particularly because I may have a large number of images that I share across sites, whether it's a branding image or Facebook or Twitter or any other number of things that I share across website domains that I don't want to have to store in multiple locations. So if we make an images directory, we'll go ahead and put a file in here, and we'll just say edit, or we'll just call this images, and we'll call it images.txt. In this case, it doesn't really matter what files we have in here. We're just going to show how we configure that for our system. So if we go back to our nginx vhost d.directory, and we look at our configuration, and once again edit www.myexample. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a new location in that says location / images. And where do I want that? Is I want that in the root of var www html images. And it should serve any content. I'm not specifying that it has to be a JPEG or a media file. I'm just saying if you get a directory request for images, the location to pull files from is not var www html my example or Google. It's from var www html images. So now I can save this file and do an nginx -t to be sure that my configuration is correct. And again, if we look at var www html images, we should see the text file that we created called images.txt. So let's go ahead and clear, do a service nginx restart. And now when we do a links to http www.myexample.local images.txt, we get the images text file that we created in the images directory. So the location allows us a lot of flexibility in how we manage what file content we serve from what location, whether they be remote or whether they be local. So we'll also be using the location directive to talk a little bit more about proxies and for doing rewrites and redirects in our future videos. But for locations directive inside of our server directive for virtual hosts, that's all there is to it. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.